It's hard for me to know where to go with this conversation because I just want to just be like, yeah, so it's the best and this is the greatest. Okay. So I guess maybe maybe, I know you've done so many podcasts and so many interviews and you've explained all this stuff, but could you give some kind of like just gateway into like what your book is or what you practice, what your beliefs are? Does that seem accessible?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to be brief and quick, and then we can drill down to where you want. So I see what I talk about are basically two things that are related. One is the idea that everybody deserves to have an emotion education because there's all these myths about emotions. And I think we should be getting the information that I put in the book in high school. And I wrote it to sort of appeal to 15 years old and up. In other words, it's written simply without jargon, but the concepts, aren't dumbed down. They're relatable through stories. And the idea is that it was based on my own experience in learning about emotions on my journey to becoming a psychotherapist. And I went to a conference on emotions once, not even knowing there was anything to learn about emotions because it was completely absent from my college experience. And I had science and neuroscience and psychology, and there was no talk about emotions, and I didn't get there were no courses offered in emotions in my master's program for social work, and there were no courses on emotions in my psychoanalytic training. So basically, like what struck me first was this idea that everybody has the same emotions and that they're not under conscious control. And I was really raised, this wasn't explicitly taught to me, but I got the idea that I was supposed to control my emotions. And I had the idea that if I had emotions, that meant I was weak in some way, that it wasn't a good thing, that the epitome of whatever, mental health, maybe, I don't know, was to kind of be like Mr. Spock from Star Trek, just to be very rational all the time. And so learning that emotions were wired in programs that served a purpose, an evolutionary purpose, that they weren't under conscious control. The only thing we can control is what we do with an emotion once they are set off in the brain. And that concept was just so refreshing to me. It immediately alleviated a lot of shame that I felt about who I was. And so I like to teach emotions as I like just to teach a basic emotion education. The second thing I do is I teach AEDP, which is the type of therapy that I now practice after being trained conventionally in psychoanalysis and reading and learning about cognitive behavioral therapy, which is considered mainstream. Those are the two kind of mainstream therapies. I found this way of working that balances both the intellect, the thoughts that we have, which are very important, rational thought. And if we really want to feel our best, we have to get used to feeling emotions in the body, where emotions live. That was my second epiphany, that emotions are in the body. Well, of course they are. We feel them there. But until somebody taught me that in a class, I sort of never made that connection. And so AEDP is all about helping people work from disconnected or depressed or anxious states or symptomatic states of being, right? We don't really get into diagnoses. We just consider, that the goal is really healing, how to feel your best, to integrate the brain, and how you work your way down from being kind of trapped in your head with your symptoms to feeling comfortable in your skin. And that means being able to feel all your feelings with minimal amounts of shame and guilt and anxiety, these inhibitory emotions, on this tool that I teach called the change triangle, which I didn't invent, I adapted from the academic literature. But with AEDP, there's more to explaining that model, because in order for people to have the courage and the strength it takes to lean into emotions as opposed to avoiding emotions, which people think is strong, but to me, it's much stronger and braver to lean into emotions. In order to feel comfortable to do that, especially when there's been a lot of trauma or adversity, And we need to explain trauma after this, because I'm really talking about a lot of the traumas that go unrecognized. They're invisible. We don't even know we're traumatized. We just are depressed and anxious, and we think it's, like you said, chemistry. But in order for people to be able to go to these vulnerable places and painful places, an AEDP therapist works first and foremost to create safety. And that means that the therapist is authentically caring, authentically skillful in ways to calm anxiety and to regulate, calm shame, and so that a person feels empowered and very good about themselves, even though they're dealing in moments with letting painful emotions travel through the body and up and out, which is the idea that emotions get blocked in the body from our traumas because there was no safe place to have them. And if we can recreate an environment where it's safe to have the emotions, the body naturally knows how to heal if we get out of the way. And so that's what AEDP therapists do, is they help people process emotions from the past and the present, and use them for thriving, as opposed to just staying above water.
That's my favorite part about that modality is, the concept that a person, when given the space and the space knows how to heal itself. It's like almost built into the DNA of, that's so empowering. It's so like, it's the opposite of the depression that I experienced for so long. It's like, okay, now I can do something.
Yeah, exactly. It is empowering. And we see the evidence of it. When you break a bone or when you cut your skin, we heal. We don't have to do anything. The body just knows what to do. And it's similarly with emotions. And because I was a science nerd and I took a lot of physics and chemistry, I sort of understand that from a sort of a physics perspective, that there's a sort of balance and a homeostasis, a harmony where we're most energy efficient. And for science geeks out there, it's like the work of Bud Craig, who wrote, what was the name of his book? But it was about feelings. And various other scientists, that they're just understanding much more about the science of emotions and how it works in the body, and evolutionary psychologists that want to understand why we have emotions. Even positive emotions are very important to sit with. And most people think, oh, I can have a positive emotion, but reliably, when I ask someone to actually tune in to something like joy or excitement, they change the subject as fast as you could say, snap your fingers. Because to stay with any feeling, especially something that makes us feel big and expansive, then all those societal messages come crashing through. Don't be too big for your britches. You're going to make somebody jealous, or you're going to make somebody angry at you. And again, it's all the same type of thing of building a capacity to experience ourselves in very profound and deep ways.
Yeah, that's my work with my therapist. There was so much of that where, like, I thought that I'm sometimes happy and that's okay. But like, very rarely could I actually sit with, like, it just, I don't think that I had ever really thought about how I can't sit with joy, how it's like so uncomfortable to sit with it. And I remember one session in particular where, like, my therapist and we just spent like 10 minutes laughing together. And that was like just as healing as the times that I cried, and she like held space for it, because it was like, it was such an intimate moment to share joy with someone. It's like, my whole body was so not used to it. It was really, that was so healing. And I wonder if probably most people are unaware that is also a challenge. It's not just the sadness and the anger and the fear and
I think it doesn't really cross a lot of people's minds until maybe they listen to this podcast. And excuse me, one could excuse me, if you get curious about that kind of thing, a lot of the blog posts that I write are actually little mini experiential exercises along with some explanation, much the way the book is. And so if you, next time someone, whoever's listening out there, next time you receive a compliment or next time you feel a good feeling, if you take a moment just to tune, just to scan your body up and down and just to notice what that good feeling is like in your body. In other words, what is your body doing that is telling your brain that you're having a good feeling? And to see if you can put some sensation words on what happens. It's very interesting. And again, it's all gets, if you approach yourself with curiosity and compassion and never any judgment, you'll learn something new about yourself. And it may be that you're going to shut it down and say, you know what, this is stupid, which we would call a defense, right? Not in a negative way, but okay, there's something that you don't want to go there. Or maybe it brings up anxiety and you can just validate that. So.
Yeah, what comes to mind for me is in my own experience, and I suspect for so many people, is that like, it's almost like I suddenly have a privilege now to be in that space where I can feel curious about my reactions to my emotions. Whereas before I was so stuck in them, there was no curiosity. It was just like, this is so big, I'm going to die. And it's like, yeah, it feels like such a privilege to be in like, wow, I can like look at that and be like, okay, there's that thing now. That feeling is big, but it's like, and then there's some agency in that, because then I'm like, do I, I know I want to react this way that I've historically reacted or my dad reacted. Now I don't know, I don't even need to do that, which is like even more change.
It's so thrilling. It's really exciting. Yeah.
So you mentioned trauma and you said we should really talk about that. That is something that, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a psychologist. And at the same time, it's one of my main passions. And I think that there is so many misconceptions about trauma that, especially the idea that like trauma only exists in bodies of people that have been through war or like the most extreme cases, and not in people that, have lived everyday life, which, I think personally, every single person has some kind of trauma that maybe they're either not aware of or they don't believe is real or something like that.
I totally agree. And yes, in AEDP, so we'll see for people listening, if you can relate to this definition, the way we, in AEDP, which stands for Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy, for anyone interested. There's so many acronyms in the field of psychology. Yeah. So trauma is when one has overwhelming emotions in the face of too much unbidden aloneness. So we're feeling a lot. So any type of event can cause and create a tremendous amount of emotions to be triggered, and an intensity that's big. And when we're young, particularly, we're so vulnerable to trauma because we have a very emotional brain that's not really yet developed, where as adults, our cerebral cortex kind of mitigates our emotional experience, attenuates it with our thought process. But children, if you've been around children, have big, big emotions. And so just imagine something very upsetting happens to a child. Let's say their dog dies, or let's say the parents are separating, and it's going to naturally trigger fear, anger, sadness. Now I'm with the sort of the more invisible traumas, right? Then if we get into overt abuse, that's going to trigger even more emotions. So, but if you imagine a little child of 3 or 4 having all these big feelings, and when the child tries to express them, parents don't have emotion education either. So parents don't know what to do with emotions, and they may just either try to cheer the child up. The parent may get triggered by the emotion and therefore shut it down. Like a lot of kids, if they get angry, if you say something like, I hate my brother. No, you don't. You love your brother. Well, it shuts it right down. And then the child's brain learns that if I show anger, right, in this way, it's sort of channeled into hateful words. Uh, it doesn't work out well for me. I get shut down. And then the child learns very unconsciously and automatically, when the anger starts to come up, to shut it down with these inhibitory emotions that I write about on this triangle. That's the diagram for all this. And the inhibitory emotions are anxiety and guilt and shame. And all these three in different ways are very good at stuffing down emotional energy, right? Real bio, because emotions come up, they're triggered in the middle of the brain, and the first thing they do is activate the body for an action that's adaptive, which is most easy to see with fear. So if we are afraid, let's say all of us experience some wild animal busting into the room, we're going to run for our lives before we consciously even know that we're frightened. It's only after that we've been having all this motion running as a result of fear being triggered that we will then be able to say, oh my God, that animal just scared the bejesus out of me. And am I safe now? And then we can evaluate the situation. So our body shifts and changes from an emotion being triggered way before we're aware of the feeling, unless we learn to read our body, like learning a new language. And you can slow down the whole process when you get triggered and be able to check in and notice what you're feeling and what the impulse is. And then we can control the impulse with enough practice. So back to trauma. So kids really develop these ways where they learn to push down feelings in order to survive the moment and the environment, depending on how their parents react to their emotions. And they develop well alongside it, but there are these sort of cordoned off areas from childhood that generally when we can go back to and allow the feelings to come up and out from that time, that people feel much better. And that's really the route to alleviating a lot of chronic anxiety and social anxiety and depression and many other symptoms like eating disorders and addictions and things like that.
So in your own practice, in your therapy practice, I mean, I want to say that I know the answer to this, but do you have evidence to support that is the case? Like, people that come in depressed, are there people that you've actually radically seen transform over, X amount of time?
Yes, not only me, but my colleagues in AEDP and related therapies like affect phobia therapy and intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy and derivative trauma theories like EMDR and somatic experiencing. These are all very worthwhile to look into, and to find a therapist that knows a bunch of these modalities is even better. But yes, in fact, I wrote about what led to the book. I don't know if you saw that article that I wrote back in 2015. I was never a writer, and what happened is I'd been practicing AEDP for many years, and I had this one particular patient that came in with a, quote, treatment-resistant depression. The article in the New York Times was called "It's Not Always Depression, Sometimes It's Shame." So having treated that person and having had my pet peeve that nobody gets emotion education turned into a moral outrage, this person, I had been through multiple psychiatric hospitalizations, every imaginable cocktail of pills, had cognitive behavioral therapy, supportive therapy, many, many, many treatments. And when they came to me, I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I didn't even want to think of them as depressed. I wanted to think of them as from a trauma perspective. And so I just, after hearing their story, thought that they had really been emotionally neglected. And so just did AEDP for them, and they got better. And then I was kind of blown away. And so I, for the first time in my life, felt I had something to say and I wrote about it. I wrote an op-ed, and I blindly sent it to the New York Times, never thinking in a million years that I would be published in the New York Times. But they published the article and it went viral. And that's how I got asked to, I had a couple of agents come and ask me to write more on it. And they asked, what do I want to write a book about? And I said, there was this triangle that turned into the change triangle that I think everybody should know about. So I'd like to write a book on that, which is that one piece from AEDP therapy that explains emotions. So
thank you for sharing that.
So for people interested to read a story about depression, that was a very severe case. But yes, it is, and it's also there's so much research that validates this, clinical research, case study after case study after case study, and there's 2 significant studies being done now. One of the reasons CBT is so mainstream, and I have no problem with CBT, I just think it's half the story. So if somebody to get well, they should see someone who knows how to work with thoughts and emotions. But CBT I guess they had a lot of funding for a lot of studies, and when you're empirically validated, insurance covers it, and it's much easier. And so now the AEDP Institute just had the preliminary results of a study on the efficacy of treating depression, and it was very, very positive, and that's going to be published, and those studies will continue. Because really, I think AEDP is the wave of the future, and these dynamic experiential psychotherapies. It doesn't make sense any other way, because the fastest way to get transformation is through the body, through emotions. And then it works its way up very fast, as opposed to kind of trickle down economics, where you were, like I think you had said, you had some more cognitive therapy. Yeah. And it doesn't really change the trigger. It gives you tools to work with your emotions, but it doesn't fundamentally change the way that we feel.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So many thoughts in my head right now. Yeah. Like, I think specifically for this podcast, I'm constantly trying to be like, I have this person in my head that is probably it's a version of myself or some part of my past that's like, doesn't believe that this is real. And so I'm constantly being like, no, this is real. And, I went off of meds, I think 2 years ago. I was on like all sorts of fantastic brain altering medication that I thought I'd be on them for life. And I haven't been on them for 2 years. And for the first bit, I thought, oh, maybe I'm just like in one of those like upswings, and maybe I'm going to crash soon. And, fingers crossed, I haven't crashed. And, my healing seems to be in trusting that change is possible, that healing is possible, that like, basically like what you're talking about is founded in science, which I understand it totally is. It's like there is this part of it that seems magical, and also it's very like tangible and proven by science. Like, I think the part that I had such a hard time with was, like I had 6, maybe 7 therapists before I met my recent one. And the first one I went to was a somatic experience practitioner, and she was great. But at the time, I wasn't able, I was like 21. I had just experienced some major trauma. I just was not able to talk about my feelings. I wasn't able to like go there with her. Like, we tried so hard and it just didn't work. And then all of the therapists after that were really, they were mostly like trying to get me better and, trying to find ways that I could, exist in the world, instead of really sitting with me in those emotions, which is what my recent therapist did. And the first session that I had with her was like, I laughed probably more than I've ever laughed. And she was like, wow, I don't think I've ever experienced a patient who has laughed this much. and it was just my defense. It was because she was just sitting there, just like holding so much space for my emotion. And I was like, I don't need it. So I'd like cry, and then I'd be laughing, and then I'd cry. And I never had an experience anything like that. It was so bizarre. And so over time I realized, like, you know, the big feeling for me that I had been neglecting to give space, you know, aside from every single feeling, was shame. Shame was like so big, and it was behind, you know, in my perspective, that's what was fueling my depression. Like, I was just totally inhibited by, like, I am bad, I'm rotten. And it was brutal. And so, like, now that I'm kind of like on this other side of it, I'm like, there's hope.
Yeah.
You know, and I just want to show the whole world that there is hope, that it's, you know, it's possible.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And in fact, that's what the New York Times article, "It's not always depression, sometimes it's shame," was the same story, that shame is so insidious, and we all have it, and it's learned in a context, and it goes hand in hand with these traumatic moments, that when we are left alone with too much feeling, we internalize that. Instead of knowing that the environment was toxic or bad for us, even when our parents loved us and did the best they could, right? Those two things can go hand in hand, that we internalize that, and we feel it as shame, and it's invisible. I had the same experience. I didn't know from shame. I was so defended against it for so many, you know, we defend against it, basically. We block it with all sorts of different ways. I can speak for myself that whenever I felt anyone was getting near my vulnerability, like for me to feel sad, or for me to feel like I needed something, and I was so proud that I would never, you know, it was very hard for me to say that I needed something, and I would get this kind of crusty tightness. And of course, it's under those any type of tightness that we get, it's where all those tender experiences lurk that are so excruciatingly painful to have us be seen, right? Shame just says we cannot be seen in that sense of being less than. It's so painful. But if we can just recognize the feeling, or recognize the defense against the feeling, and we have a little education, to me, that makes a big difference. That, okay, I may not be able to stop the feeling, but I can at least, I've read about shame, I understand what it is, and this might be it. And even though I'm feeling it, and I just want to crawl into a hole, maybe there's a little space for the intellectual understanding that I am probably experiencing shame, even though I feel like I am the lowest piece of whatever on earth. I can hold on to the fact that it's a feeling, it's not true. Because if you read enough about shame, you'll know it's just not true, but it feels true. And that little bit of space in knowing it might make all the difference in the world, to be able to do something to, you know, even at home, to get yourself out of it. Like, I put a lot of free resources on the Change Triangle YouTube channel and my website, which is hilaryjacobshendel.com. It's just a resource center to understand about emotions. And, you know, when we're triggered into a terrible state, and we don't have a therapist, or we don't have a therapy session until next week, what I write about and what I do myself is to try to come up with reliable ways that I can try to, like, change my state a bit. If not totally, just a little bit more wiggle room. And those are just like simple to do things that with trial and error, you find the state changers that work for you. And they range from exercising, right? We hear all about that can just change your state where you felt awful into something where all those endorphins and the chemicals are being released into the brain, to masturbating, which releases all those great endorphins, or having sex, or making yourself a cup of hot tea, or listening to music, or taking a hot or cold shower, holding ice cubes. This is in the trauma world, some sort of tricks to get yourself out of a state. But just any reading. So you want to find the things that when you at least know I'm in a terrible state, that you have the wherewithal to try to change the state. Because it's a neural network that got lit up from a memory, or likely from a memory dovetailing on a present situation. And if we can we want to figure out how to shift the brain into another neural network, basically.
That's interesting, because right before we started this conversation, I was lying on my couch with headphones on, listening to your audiobook on 1.8 speed, trying to just cram everything in, because I read it a year ago and I'm like, well, I should reread it now. So yesterday I started, but it was just like I was starting to feel this like intense anxiety, and because there was so much fear behind it. Now I'm trying to check in, was it anxiety or was it fear? I think it was mostly just fear, but it manifested as like, it's like, oh no. And
they feel similarly in the body, anxiety and fear.
Yeah. So I took a second. I was like, is this really how I want to go into a conversation with this person? Like trying to cram and be like, am I good enough? Like, so I'm like, okay, first step, let's turn this down to one speed, like just regular speed. So it's like slow talking instead of like, blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, I think I'm just going to listen to some Enya. And then I spent the next 5 minutes listening to Enya, and I calmed down. And it's like, I think a long time ago, or at least before I learned about AEDP or trauma or anything, I would have just continued down that spiral and been like, I'm crazy, I'm bad. And then, gone to bed because I'm like, well, I suck.
Exactly. And that's awesome. I mean, A+ on emotions and state changing and doing that work. So, right, I relate totally. Same thing. And right, I have this similar experiences, not right before, because I was actually excited to talk. And I knew I was excited because I felt all this energy kind of coming up, and I was looking forward to our time at 1 o'clock. I was like a half an hour, let me eat something, get in my kind of make sure that I'm not hungry and in my sort of ready to go. But I was really excited to be able to talk to you and share all this stuff. So that's how, this sort of exuberant energy coming out and I work a lot with fantasy. So when we have emotions like excitement, right, or fear, they come up and they want to come up with an action. But with excitement, as I would experience it, let's say now sitting down, we can't really move. I can't jump around and dance around and go, yay. Mm-hmm. So, and particularly in a therapy session, when I'm helping someone get to know their excitement, we just let the fantasy of what the excitement wants to do, if it can come out of the confines of our skin, because we get anxious when all that energy comes up and it's got no place to go. And fantasy is a really cool thing, because the brain, and this is science, doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality. And they know that because when they hook people up to fMRI machines and they ask them to imagine running, parts of the brain light up where you're actually running. And so that's one way that I, just to carry this through to therapy for a second, that I help people safely learn to express their anger, or to process their anger, not to express it, is to be able to see what the impulse is. Maybe I want to call my friend like a jerk, and I just imagine doing it from the feeling in my body of the anger, and just to try out what that feels like, not making it up in my head, but like if this anger could fully come out and do in fantasy what it wants to do, what does it want to do, and letting yourself imagine that. And there's lots of really cool ways to use fantasy to help us feel better and to process trauma.
I love that. That's like,
I don't know how I got on that.
No, it's so perfect.
Excitement from your experience.
It's just like that was a big, for so long feeling stuck in like embarrassment, which, was an extension of that shame. Is just like, oh, you want me to imagine like dancing around, or you want to imagine myself like yelling at someone? Like, I can't, like, for a long time there was even like a block, like I didn't even know how to imagine, and I had to like reconnect with that child part of myself, because that's like, it's there. It's just, I had kind of neglected it for so long that like, one of my favorite parts about being alive now is just like, imagination and creativity and play. I think it's all connected, and it's so like important.
So important and so connected and right. And it is, it's one thing also to do this on your own, but if you're with a therapist or you're with a coach or something, that I imagine, so many people I know are afraid to show an emotion because they think they'll look silly or they'll look stupid, whether it's crying or I don't want you to see me look angry because I look ugly, because that's my go-to question. I'll make the suggestion to work with the anger this way. And, no, I could never do that. Okay. Never push. But so tell me, what do you imagine? What's the worst thing that would happen? What is it what do you think I would see? Or what do you think you would do? And, and then you're trying to help make it safe to just test out the waters. And sometimes it takes a while.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me now is repairing attachment wounds, and like how important that, at least in my experience and from what I understand is also like a fundamental part of AEDP, is like repairing those wounds that have, been a result of childhood emotional neglect or abuse, whatever. It's like, it's very real. Sorry.
Or just parental mistakes.
Yeah.
Right? Unwittingly caused.
Yeah. Like I spent quite a long time feeling very angry at my parents. And now I'm in a place where I'm like, yes, they did not do this intentionally. And so it's important to, remember that. But yeah, like
they were responsible. That's how I put it. Because a lot of people don't want to blame. Some people love to be angry at their parents. And a lot of people really struggle with, they'll say, I don't want to blame my parents. And I'm like, it's not really about blame, but they are the responsible. I would say, would you agree that if you're the child and they're the adults, who is responsible? And most people can agree that the adults are responsible. And, we're children are just at the mercy. And they also think their parents are their world, so they believe them, even though we as parents don't know what we're doing most of the time, right? You don't get a handbook, you just love. And if you're lucky and you had good parenting to model it, but so many people were also abused and neglected as children. They're kind of doing the best, trying to not repeat errors, and inadvertently, it's always something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, going back to that idea of attachment repair, it's like, that's another one of my favorite parts about AEDP is what you were talking about just a few moments ago about like someone witnessing me cry, someone witnessing me feel angry. And, from my perspective, then seeing their reaction to it, and if it's a good therapist, the reaction is like, I see you, or reflecting that. And, for me, that was one of the most powerful parts of the whole experience, was learning to trust someone. And almost as if like I was being reparented, so that I could then begin to reparent myself, repair those attachment wounds. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think that's just the way I think of it. It brings to mind so many people worrying about they don't go to therapy because they say, I don't want to be dependent on someone. And I think that the goal for sure is to help us be our own loving parent to our wounded child selves, or to wounded parts of us, or just to be a champion all the time for ourselves, and to be a guiding light for when to have the courage and the confidence to say you've done something wrong, to be accountable for the hurts that we've caused other people, and to be able, when we are hurt, to not only comfort our emotions and soothe our emotions, but then to think through what needs to be done, if anything, in the relationship, so that we can have healthy relationships where we have agency and we speak our mind. So I think, again, we humans are born, babies, we're wired for connection. And it is in connection where good and bad things happen. And so if the parts that didn't go well, all trauma is relational in a way.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking through that. If I, maybe not catastrophic. I mean, it's interesting. I'm trying to think about war trauma. I'm trying to think about catastrophic events. But I don't know if you've read any of Peter Levine's book,
Yeah.
Waking the Tiger. Did you happen to read that? Right. So it's like, and as I mentioned earlier, in AEDP, we know it's not what happens in life, it's what happens next. So two people could experience the same terrible event. One develops trauma symptoms and the other doesn't. Why is that? Well, there's genetics and there's disposition, but it's really a function of the support and the ability to feel the feelings that the trauma brought up freely, and to have somebody supporting you through that till they process through. So for example, in our society, we're really terrible when somebody dies. The idea is, people say to their family members, you should be over this by now, or isn't it time you were done with this? And it's just wrong, because there is no set time to grieve a loss. And there's no set right way to respond, whether it's with anger or sadness, that everybody gets to have their own feelings. And so most things in life are interpersonal. Even if people don't want to be around people, there's usually a reason for that. And so I love what you said, that with ideally, where there's attachment trauma, the therapist would teach the patient or the client how to be emotionally attuned to themselves through demonstrating emotional attunement in the way that you get to define it. In other words, I don't get to say that you should feel a certain way, or that this thing that I've just done now should make you feel safe. If you don't feel safe, you're right. If you feel this feeling, you're right. You are the expert on you. And so it's really about attunement. And for people interested in attunement, there's something called rupture and repair, which there's 2 articles on my blog. I hope it's okay. I just like to share educational resources.
Oh, please do.
Everything we're talking about, there's these like short articles for people to get a taste of if it's resonating. So there's, if you Google rupture and repair part 1 and 2, and then put in Hilary, Hendel, you'll get 2 articles. One is what happens in infancy in parents, and then how that gets transformed or translated to adult relationships, because they're all connected. Our relationships with our primary attachment figures as children then gets transferred to our relationship with our primary attachment figure, which is our adult partners. Yeah. And so if you're having trouble in your relationship, you can look to the past and try to rework it, do a different dance, as they say.
Love it. I'm wondering now if I'd really like to, I love how it this doesn't sound abstract in my judgment. I think that this conversation makes a lot of sense, and I think it'll be accessible for most people. And I'm also wondering if you would feel open to maybe trying to show an example of what it would look like, or trying to make, I think what I want to do is try and make this really tangible for someone listening or watching. Do you have any idea of how we could do that, or?
Well, first it brings me to a question, which is, always, because I'm writing self-help. The book is to be used as a self-help book, either just to provide a left-brained intellectual education, which is better than not having an education in emotions, or to be read with your partner or friend, or to be brought to a therapist. So do you want to make it accessible in a self-help way, so that somebody is alone and struggling with a feeling and what they might do? Or do you want to make it accessible with a demonstration about AEDP and how a therapist might work?
Well, I did an episode. I haven't released it yet, but I have done another episode on AEDP where we did do an example of that. So I mean, it definitely wouldn't hurt to do another example of that. I'm wondering, yeah, maybe it would be better to, yeah, try and speak to the person that feels, too scared, or, for some reason isn't going to a therapist or isn't connected, who feels, my guess is that a lot of people listening to podcasts are doing it because it's more accessible. It's safer to listen to people talking about it. And so maybe I want to just like speak to those people. What's your idea for like how we could make this more self-help and like tangible?
I mean, we could just start with, someone's going about their day and something happens, or they wake up in the morning, or it's like a bad day and you're just distressed. And what I might do, or what I might recommend somebody might do.
Okay. Can I be an example of that?
Yeah.
Would that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So, shame comes up a lot for me. There's a lot of judging myself for, especially with this podcast, especially with like pretty much anything I create. There's this kind of balance between, or this dance between like, wow, I'm so proud of myself. Wow, I feel so like enriched by creating these things, and then also judging myself so hard for it, and really getting into kind of a shame cave where then I turn into this blob, and it's hard to even see, it quite literally changes what reality looks like,
Yes.
My partner actually physically looks a little bit scarier. And
yes.
Yeah, so that's something that I sit with quite often.
Yes. Yes. And so can you see, so as a therapist, I would first, or as a coach for emotion, I would say, do you know the moment? We want to get very specific if possible. Sometimes you can't because it's a diffuse mood and you don't know what it's from. But is there a specific example of a moment that you sort of felt would feel the shame come in? Is it when you're about to do a podcast, like an episode, like 5 minutes before? Is it the night before? Does it have to do with something with your partner?
Yeah, there was a moment 2 days ago that was really big, and it was my partner and I were fixing part of our house, doing some silly roof repair, and suddenly the task in my mind seemed so much bigger than I thought it was. And then suddenly I felt so scared, but instead of feeling scared, I went, like
into self.
I was frozen, and I was totally detached, and my partner was like, could we take a second to just kind of like sit down, and so we did that, but I was so dissociated. I was, she was like kind of grasping for me emotionally, like, hey, like, how are you feeling? And I was just like in a different world. And it was like shame. Like I was a little kid feeling like I can't do this. This is too big. I'm just a dumb little kid. And it was so powerful. And once I went through it, it didn't last too long, but when it was there, it was so intense. And once I kind of moved through it, I was like, holy crap, that was really big.
Yeah. So that's such thank you. I mean, for sharing that. I imagine a lot of people listening can relate, as can I. And so from as a therapist, I get very curious. I'd want to get very curious. When was the first time you felt that way? And I would, taking that feeling, if we could bridge back in time. And sometimes I do this for myself. It's individual, because if there's a lot of trauma, then someone is probably not going to want to lean into it, because the feelings, one was alone at the time that these shame states happened, then you really do need someone else to be with you to transform the shame. And you were with your partner, who sounds lovely, that she wanted you to just sit and sort of be. So there's a couple of ways from a self-help perspective, is just what you did, which is to kind of stop what you're doing, right? Not to blow past it, but to really honor that you're not you're not feeling well, that you're not feeling right, and to kind of slow down and administer. One way you could go is to just be good to yourself, and instead of judging yourself, just validating that there's something that's very triggering about this repair, that it's probably bringing up, dovetailing on something else.
Mm.
And you could try to figure that out. Did you know what it was bringing up? Like, is
Um,
it a feeling that was familiar?
it's
That,
very familiar, but it's kind of hazy.
mm-hmm,
I don't have a specific, well, no, I do actually.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, yeah, I think I know. I mean, yeah, an idea, a memory comes to mind for sure.
mm-hmm. Is that something you want to share?
Yeah, you know what? I'm thinking that your book is such an amazing like self-help resource. Maybe it would just be helpful to like show an example of like, what this looks like.
Mm-hmm,
So someone can be like, oh, that doesn't actually seem that scary, because
mm-hmm.
it's not. When I'm in the feelings, it feels scary, but like the actual process of it is like very gentle. And yeah, so if you're open to it, I'd love to kind of like just give a little example of that
Sure.
experience.
Yes. Yeah. So what I would say is, where does that take you if you were to get some, and there's a couple with shame generally. What I would ask someone is, I would say the part of you that feels shame, because it's very important. Shame is a very difficult emotion to even talk about. People start to experience shame just with the mere mention of the word. And shame is the most excruciating, annihilating, like you're disappearing, like it's just a horrible sinking feeling. So in a session right away, I would say, uh, can the part of you that is experiencing shame, can you get some distance, almost like I would want to shore up your most confident part of your present day self, and then see if you could get from that confident part of you, if you could kind of ask that the shame part to come and sit next to you. Now,
Mm-hmm.
some people can do this right away, and some people look at me like, what are you talking about? It's not a part, it's all of me. It does feel, because it can feel that way. But my first kind of go-to is, can that part of you that feels shame just come out of you, so you don't have to, so you can get a break from it, and we can really try to help it. So it's kind of a suggestion. And so I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think so. It feels
Yeah.
like there's a younger part of me that's like maybe like 4 or 5 sitting kind of next to me now.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. And as you, with your present day eyes, just try to keep, with your mind's eye, trying to visualize that part of you, and put, you can locate that part depending, you could imagine that part of you 6 feet away. You could imagine that part of you 12 feet away, or you could imagine that part of you a foot away. And you can play with the distance so that you can still stay in touch with it, but that you're not feeling so much that horrible feeling of shame.
Hmm.
And if you can describe, how you see that little boy, what's he wearing? Where is he? Is he in a memory?
Um, yeah,
Are
they're
they,
just kind of like just like hunched over,
yeah,
and
yeah.
like because of like how much I've put into this stuff, it feels more accessible, and right away I just want to be like, oh, come here.
Yeah.
But the first few times that I like did this kind of exercise, I wanted to push that person so far away,
Mm-hmm.
and it was hard to even imagine them. And at points I was like, I don't even want them in the room. So I
Mm-hmm.
just want to name that, because that, I think that's probably a pretty common experience for some people that have, really struggled.
It is a common experience, and that's because that part of them has cost them a lot of pain, and so we try to banish these parts from our internal world, and that again sort of keeps them pushing through, because traumatized young parts of us want to be witnessed. They need the validation. They know that they're wise. Something has to happen to transform that feeling into something better. So that's really beautiful. You've done.
I love what you say about that they're wise. I'd never thought of it that way. That's so, I love it.
Mm-hmm. And that instinct, first of all, forgive me for the pronouns. And what's
That's
interesting
okay.
is I often ask people as they look at the part that holds shame, I don't assume that it's the same gender as the person sitting near me. In other words, women patients can have male parts that we work with, and vice versa, and can also have parts that don't have a gender or that have any sort of combination of identifying in some way. So in a way, I don't know if that's something that you feel comfortable with, but as you see that person, that young 3 or 4 year old, what's your sense of the gender? Not figuring it out with your brain right now, but what your sense is.
That feels too complicated.
Okay. So we'll put that to the side. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to ask how that question feels.
Yeah.
But that would be something that I wouldn't assume. I just
Right.
want you to know that, and I want people to know that. And then what you said after that about your impulse to come here.
Yeah.
I would say, does that feel comfortable if you just imagine that that's happening right now?
Yeah.
And what that feels like for you, the person, the adult I see before me, how that
It's
feels.
interesting. I just started kind of like rocking.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, I think that's historically like how I soothed myself when I was little. And it's interesting that just came up because I'm like thinking of myself like nurturing my younger self.
Yes. And just notice what that's like.
There's a feeling of like loneliness that comes up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even though I'm here like connecting with that younger part of me, that, you know, all of the work that I've done is there's such loneliness with it. And like, you know, this distrust of any adults or any like big people.
Mm-hmm. So that's really important. If you check into that little person that you're rocking with, what do you sense?
They feel really scared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it okay for that child that you're
Yeah.
look at
Yeah.
it this way?
Yeah. I think I can tell that they feel like seen, and also, you know, there's still that shame, that kind of defeated feeling that's
Mm-hmm.
with it. It's
Yeah.
this memory of like building something out of wood and nails when my dad was building a deck. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember it feeling so fun. And then he made some comment about how it was crappy, or like was trying to like teach me how to like do it properly. And I remember that moment for some reason, it just felt so deflating. And so that younger part of me is just kind of like, and scared. It's almost like carrying that shame everywhere that they go. There's like,
Yeah.
and I can feel it now in my body again, like in my shoulders.
Yeah.
It's like a real heaviness.
Yeah. What do you think he needs, or what do you think he needed at the time that would have been, or they needed at the time that would have been more helpful, or would have been?
Oh, like like just acknowledge, or just to feel seen, to feel like, I think what they needed was like, oh, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way that you create things, instead of like, oh, you did it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so now I'm wondering, as you are there
Yeah.
with this little person,
Yeah.
you when you were so young, and your father, if you have any feelings towards your father for what he did.
Yeah. Oh, there's the laughter.
Yeah, I was noticing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel angry.
Yeah,
I feel hurt.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's sadness and anger and
Anger and sadness, and hurt. Yeah. And so we'd want to be with each one of those feelings one at a time because they each have a different impulse for action.
hmm.
Um, and and let those feelings come to the fore. So I would ask you which one between sadness and anger, it feels a little more front and center as you're there.
My impulse is to say sadness because that feels safer for me, but I kind of want to reach into some discomfort and go for anger because I think it's an important, I've cried enough on this podcast. I think it's probably important to show that it's okay to also feel angry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people struggle a lot with anger. So now, I'm just sort of feeling protective of you and aware.
That's funny because I'm feeling protective of you.
Oh, what a sweet moment. No, I'm aware of the time and I'm aware. See, what we would do now in session, if we had time, is I would ask you where the anger, how you know that you're angry, how you feel it in your body, and if this anger could come up and out towards your father in fantasy, not as a dress rehearsal. He'll never even know about it, just between you and me, what the anger, what the impulse of just the anger is, not all your other feelings that you have towards your dad and not any love. We would ask those to step aside. But if the anger in this moment could fully come forward, what's the impulse? What would it want to do or say? And that's where we go next. And then let, either that would come naturally or we'd struggle with anger a little bit and we'd pick it up next time. But ultimately, the idea is to let that anger, let the charge in the body decrease. That's how you know you're done. So that you imagine this thing that you wanted to do, maybe you'd feel a physical impulse, like punching him in the face. Maybe you just want to tell him off. And then I'd ask you to check back in. I'm not kind of going through the motions now because I don't want to, I have a session.
No, this could take a long time. I understand that.
And I also don't want to leave you feeling raw because it's really raw work. Yeah. And I'd want to make sure we had a good 15 minutes to kind of, sew everything up in a way that you could go on with your day.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, I'm reeling.
Yeah.
Because again, back to safety.
Yeah. I think the most, maybe you actually know of examples that are like public where people are actually showing this work being done. But I really wish I could show what it's like on the other side of this, which is feeling, like right when I like lift my shoulders, I'm like calm, confident, secure.
It's like,
yeah, because I know that like if we carried down that road, that would happen. Just because like I've done it enough. And I just want to like emphasize that.
Well, my book has so many stories these are called rage portrayals. And they're like they're very vivid, as you may remember. There's 7 long, not long, there may be like 10 pages each. And they go through a session. And my purpose in doing that is because when you're teaching emotions, you can't think your way through an emotion. You have to experience an emotion. And I thought one safe way to experience an emotion is to be a fly on the wall and watch somebody processing emotions from start to finish. And then at the end of the story, there's some gentle exercises so that one can dip their toe in the water in a gentle way and a safe way of experiencing an emotion or getting a taste of what that's like. So I don't know of any, I'm actually working with someone to try to make some videos. That this person came to me and wanted to help other people, also an artist. And we were trying to do some videos of my work with them, and that would show some of these things, these, so that they're demystify them, because the most important thing is to really demystify this whole process.
Yes.
No one has to feel ashamed of the process or frightened of it. It's rather predictable how emotions and trauma get processed in many ways, and each person is unique, but there is a phenomenology that's predictable. And so the more people learn and read about it, the better. How are you doing? How was that experience for you?
Oh, there's a sense, there's a feeling of like, oh, I wish I could have shown that other side, and also like totally respect. I think it's just like,
Well, maybe we could get together again and do that. And
I'm totally open to that.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm totally open to that as well.
But like, I think what I need is to just check in with you. Like, how is this for you? Because I feel scared that maybe that didn't go well. I don't know.
Oh no, I thought that went really well. See, in this,
Okay.
then I would want to know what scared you. What did you see in me? This is the relational piece.
Yes.
Did you see something in me that alarmed you? Is this something that you know about yourself? Because you did let yourself be very vulnerable. And so, and then I did kind of say, oh, I kind of halted it, which could create some shame.
Right.
A lot going on.
Yeah.
And inside you. But I thought, I just think you're offering people gold, because there's not too many people willing to show their shamed parts and to work with them live. So I think it's the most wonderful thing I could imagine. And I bet you have a very loyal following who's appreciative.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Just so true. So thank you. Thank you for your willingness.
I'm going to put, I'd like to put the links for those specific two blogs that you talked about in the show notes of this episode. And you mentioned your website, but again, for anyone that missed that, can you give a little plug synopsis of how people can?
For people interested in emotions, you can go to HilaryJacobsHendel.com and spell it anyway. It'll sort of come up. I'm all over social media also, because that's the way to spread education. And so this is really a labor of love, and I just try to create resources. And there's also the Change Triangle YouTube. But if you want to sign up for my blog, I don't sell anything. Once a month, I send a new article. And if you peruse on HilaryJacobsHendel.com is the blog. There's a toolbox section on my website that teaches you how to ground and breathe, that explains the different defenses. It's just a one-stop shop for resources on emotional health and trauma and attachment. And most of the blogs, except for the holiday blog posts, don't go out of style. They're ever present, so you can peruse. I think there's about 60 different articles there. And then, so I'll send you some links if you want to put in the show notes too.
Okay.
That article, it's not always depression. Sometimes it's shame. A lot of people really like, and it gets shared a lot and resonates a lot. But I would say that's the two main things. The three: the book, which you have to buy because Random House owns it. I can't give it away. And HilaryJacobsHendel.com, which has free stuff, and the Change Triangle YouTube channel, which doesn't have ads or anything. It's really, I just want to disseminate this information and have people take it and share it. So you can also download the Change Triangle, which people could Google to see a map. And the idea is to basically be able to locate yourself on either any of the three corners of the Change Triangle or underneath it, which is that calm state, that open-hearted state that we all want to spend more time in. And that's sort of the whole goal of this, is just to reliably spend more and more time in calm and confident states where there's clarity of thought and courage to try new things and connection with the world. So
I love it.
I hope people will go and check it out and subscribe to my email list if you want to stay connected.
Cool.